I still remember the exact moment my son-in-law's smile disappeared. The old courtroom in Fairfax County was quiet except for the soft rustling of papers and the hum of the air conditioning. I was standing alone at the defense table wearing a navy blue sweater and the same pearl necklace my late husband had given me 30 years earlier. Across the room, Derek leaned back in his chair and laughed. "No lawyer," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You're finished." A few people glanced toward me. I didn't answer. At 72 years old, I had learned that silence often revealed more than words. The judge entered through the side door. Everyone stood. I stood too. The judge looked toward the defense table. Then he froze. For a moment, nobody understood why. Then he smiled. "Welcome back, Your Honor." The room went silent. Derek's face drained of color. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, I saw fear in his eyes. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore. For almost 30 years, I served as a federal judge. Before that, I spent years practicing law, raising a family, paying a mortgage, attending church on Sundays, and trying to build a life with the man I loved." The title was important. The work mattered. But after retirement, I discovered something surprising. Very few people care who you used to be. They care who you are today. After my husband Robert passed away from heart failure, I chose a quiet life. The house became my refuge. It sat on 3 peaceful acres just outside town. Nothing fancy. Just a white 2-story home with a wraparound porch, flower beds, and a large oak tree Robert had planted the year our daughter Susan was born. Every board in that house carried a memory. Every room contained a piece of our lives. Susan learned to walk in the living room. Robert taught her to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Christmas dinners filled the dining room with laughter for decades. I never imagined someone would one day try to take it away, especially not family. Susan married Derek 22 years ago. At first I liked him. He worked hard. He treated my daughter well. He seemed dependable. The kind of young man every parent hopes their child will marry. But life has a way of changing people. 3 years before the lawsuit, Susan died. Cancer. The word still hurt every time I thought about it. She fought bravely, longer than doctors expected. But eventually the disease won. After the funeral, I worried constantly about Derek and my granddaughter Lily. Grief can break people in different ways. Lily became quieter. Derek became angrier. At first I excused it. Everyone grieves differently. But as months turned into years, something inside him changed. The warm young husband Susan had loved seemed to disappear. He began talking about money constantly. Inheritance, property values, retirement accounts, assets. Words that had never mattered much before suddenly dominated every conversation. The first time he mentioned my house, I dismissed it. "I don't know how you manage alone out here," he said one afternoon. I smiled. "I enjoy the peace." "You ever think about selling?" "No." He looked disappointed. That struck me as odd. But I ignored it. A few months later, he brought it up again. Then again. And again. Each time the questions became more specific. How much was the property worth? Had I updated my will? Who would inherit the land? Eventually, I stopped discussing the subject altogether. Something felt wrong. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, everything changed. I was drinking coffee and reading the local paper when a process server knocked on my front door. At first I assumed he had the wrong address. People don't receive lawsuits in quiet neighborhoods like mine. At least that's what I used to think. The man handed me an envelope. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Yes, you've been served." I stared at him. "Served with what?" "A civil lawsuit." The drive away from my house felt longer than usual after he left. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour before opening the documents. When I finally did, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Derek was suing me. Not for money, for my home. According to the filing, he claimed that various family arrangements and inheritance issues entitled him to ownership interests in the property. It was nonsense. Legal nonsense. The house had belonged solely to Robert and me for over 40 years. There was no ambiguity, no confusion, no legitimate claim. Yet somehow my own son-in-law had convinced himself he deserved it. I felt many emotions that day. Anger, disappointment, confusion. But more than anything, I felt sadness. Because the lawsuit wasn't really about the house. It was about greed. And greed had transformed someone I once considered family. A week later, Lily came to visit. She was 21 by then. A wonderful young woman. Smart. Kind. Much like her mother. She found me sitting on the porch. "Grandma," I smiled. "Hello, sweetheart?" She sat beside me. "I heard about the lawsuit." I nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry." "None of this is your fault." I don't understand him anymore. Neither did I. We sat quietly for several minutes, then she asked a question that stayed with me. Are you scared? I looked toward the oak tree. The same tree Robert planted decades earlier. The same tree that survived storms, droughts, and harsh winters. No, I said softly. I'm heartbroken. That answer seemed to hurt her even more. As the court date approached, friends urged me to hire an attorney. I could have. Many excellent lawyers would have gladly taken the case. Some had appeared before me years earlier. Others were former colleagues. But this wasn't complicated. The law was clear. The facts were clear. And honestly, part of me wanted Derek to understand something. Titles don't matter. Expensive lawyers don't matter. Truth matters. The morning of the hearing arrived. I drove myself to the courthouse, walked through security, entered the courtroom alone. And that's when Derek laughed. No lawyer, he said. You're finished. A few minutes later, the judge entered. And everything changed. The silence after the judge said, "Welcome back, Your Honor," felt almost physical. You could hear chairs creak. You could hear someone cough in the back row. Most of all, you could hear Derek's confidence collapsing. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the judge smiled warmly. "It is good to see you again, Judge Whitmore." "Thank you, Your Honor," I replied. The exchange lasted only a moment, but the damage to Derek's strategy had already been done. His attorney looked from me to the judge and back again. Suddenly, everyone in the room understood that I wasn't some confused elderly widow who had wandered into court alone. I was a retired federal judge, and while retirement had been kind to me, I had not forgotten the law. The hearing proceeded normally, at least on the surface. The judge treated both sides fairly exactly as he should. No special treatment, no favors. That was one thing many people misunderstood about judges. Our power came from following the rules, not bending them. Still, I noticed the change in Derek immediately. He stopped smirking, stopped whispering jokes to his attorney, stopped acting as though the outcome was guaranteed. For the first time, he looked uncertain. His attorney, however, remained aggressive. A younger man in an expensive suit, sharp haircut, perfect tie. The type of lawyer who billed by the hour and wanted everyone to know it. He presented Derek's claims confidently. According to their argument, Susan's death had created certain inheritance rights that somehow gave Derek a legitimate interest in my property. As he spoke, I listened carefully. Years on the federal bench had taught me something important. When people tell the truth, their stories usually become simpler. When people lie, their stories become more complicated. The attorney's argument was becoming very complicated. The judge noticed it too. Several times he interrupted. "Counselor, can you clarify this timeline?" The attorney shuffled papers. "Certainly, Your Honor." The explanation raised even more questions. A few minutes later, another interruption. "Counselor, this document appears inconsistent with the previous filing." More paper shuffling, more explanations, more confusion. I remained silent. Sometimes the most effective thing a person can do is allow a weak argument to reveal its own flaws. After nearly an hour, the judge scheduled additional proceedings. Neither side had won. Neither side had lost. But as everyone gathered their documents, I noticed something interesting. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. Not once. Outside the courthouse, I walked toward my car. A familiar voice stopped me. "Eleanor." I turned. Standing near the steps was Harold Benson. We had known each other for over 20 years. He had been a county recorder before retirement. One of the most detail-oriented public servants I had ever met. "Harold," he smiled. "Never thought I'd see you back in court." I was hoping not to. His smile faded. "I heard about the case." I nodded. "Unpleasant situation." "Very." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Something about those records bothered me. That got my attention." "What records?" "The ownership documents." I studied him carefully. Harold was not the type of man who made casual accusations. "What bothered you? I can't put my finger on it yet." He frowned. "But some of the dates seem strange." Years of courtroom experience immediately awakened my instincts. "What kind of strange? I'm not sure." "Yet." That final word lingered in my thoughts all the way home. Yet? Over the next several weeks, the case moved forward. Requests for records, document exchanges, additional filings. Nothing unusual, at least at first. Then I started seeing things that didn't make sense. Small details, minor inconsistencies, dates that seemed slightly off, references to paperwork that appeared years after certain events supposedly occurred. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they formed a troubling pattern. One evening, I spread the documents across my dining room table. The same table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. The same table where Susan had done homework as a teenager. Now it was covered with legal filings. I hated that. Lily arrived shortly before sunset. She carried a casserole dish. I brought dinner. I smiled. "You're becoming far too good to me." She laughed softly. "You say that every time." We ate together in the kitchen. For a while, neither of us mentioned the lawsuit. Instead, we talked about ordinary things. Her job, my garden, church activities, the weather, normal conversations, the kind families should be having. Eventually, she glanced toward the stack of papers. "Any progress?" I sighed. "Some. Good progress. I'm not sure yet." She looked down. "Dad says you're trying to ruin him." The statement hurt. Not because I believed it, because I knew Derek probably did. I don't want to ruin anyone. I know. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Mom would hate this. That almost broke me. Susan absolutely would have hated it. She had always been the peacemaker, the bridge between people, the one who could calm arguments before they became wars. Without her, everything seemed harder. A few days later, another package of documents arrived. I sat in my home office reviewing them. Halfway through the stack, I stopped. Read one page again, then a third time. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The signature on one document looked familiar, not because it was authentic, because it wasn't. I had spent decades evaluating evidence, examining records, reviewing testimony, looking for inconsistencies. The signature appeared to be copied from another source, not identical, but close enough to raise serious concerns. I pulled older records from my files, compared them side by side. The differences became impossible to ignore. The spacing, the pressure marks, the letter formation. Every instinct I possessed told me the same thing. Someone had altered something, or someone had created something that never should have existed. I leaned back in my chair. For a long moment, I stared out the window at Robert's oak tree. The lawsuit had begun as a sad family dispute. Now it appeared to be becoming something else, something much more serious. And if my suspicions were correct, Derek wasn't simply making a weak legal argument. He was building that argument on documents that might not be genuine. As darkness settled outside, I closed the file. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I realized this case could change everything. Not just for me, for Derek as well. The older I get, the more I appreciate simple truths. A signature is either genuine or it isn't. A document is either authentic or it isn't. Facts don't care about emotions. They don't care about greed. And they certainly don't care about family politics. That's one reason I spent so many years on the federal bench. Facts eventually tell their story. The challenge is having the patience to listen. 3 days after I discovered the suspicious signature, my phone rang. It was Harold Benson. "Eleanor, are you sitting down?" That wasn't how Harold normally started conversations. "Yes, I found it." My heart skipped. "Found what?" "The discrepancy." I grabbed a notebook. "Tell me." For the next 10 minutes, Harold walked me through county property records, stretching back more than 40 years. The records showed exactly what I already knew. Robert and I purchased the house together shortly after Susan was born. The deed had never included Susan, never included Derek, never included anyone else. Ownership had remained unchanged through every year of our marriage, through Robert's death, through Susan's death, through everything. There was no legal pathway connecting Derek to ownership. None. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part involved several documents that had appeared much later. Documents Derek's attorneys were using to support their claim. Harold's voice became serious. "Those records weren't filed when they should have been." "What do you mean?" "I mean they suddenly appeared years after the dates listed on them." I closed my eyes. There it was, the missing piece. The thing that had been bothering me. Someone had attempted to create history after the fact. And that almost never ends well. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I believe so. Years of courtroom experience taught me not to celebrate early. But I felt the tide turning. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my office. I thought about Derek. Not the man he had become. The man he used to be. I remembered his wedding day. Susan looked radiant. Derek couldn't stop smiling. The future seemed wide open. Hope filled every corner of the church. If someone had told me then that 20 years later he would be suing me for my home, I would have laughed. Life can change people. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes all at once. The hardest changes are the ones driven by pain. And whether I liked it or not, pain had become a central part of Derek's story. A week later, another hearing was scheduled. This one focused on records and documentation. The courtroom felt different than before. Less confident. Less theatrical. Derek looked tired. The expensive confidence he wore during the first hearing had begun to crack. His attorney appeared tense as well. The judge wasted little time. Questions came quickly. Dates, signatures, filing histories, procedures. The attorney struggled more than he had previously. Several answers sounded rehearsed. Others sounded invented. Neither is helpful in court. At one point, the judge adjusted his glasses and studied a document for nearly 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. Finally, he looked up. "Counselor, can you explain why this filing appears in county records years after its stated execution date?" The attorney blinked, then blinked again. I had seen that look before. Many times, usually moments before someone realized they were losing control of a situation. The explanation that followed was complicated. Far too complicated. The judge seemed unimpressed. The hearing ended without a final ruling. But everyone understood something important. Derek's case was in trouble. Serious trouble. Outside the courthouse, Lily was waiting. She had attended quietly from the gallery. As we walked toward the parking lot, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. "I barely recognize him anymore." I knew exactly who she meant. "Your father has been carrying a lot of pain." She shook her head. "Pain doesn't excuse this." "No, it doesn't." That answer surprised her. I think she expected me to defend him. Perhaps part of me still wanted to. But accountability matters. At every age. Especially when family is involved. A few days later, Lily called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded strained. "Grandma, can I come over?" "Of course." She arrived 20 minutes later. The moment she entered the kitchen, I knew something was wrong. She sat at the table and stared into a cup of coffee. For a while, she said nothing. Then tears appeared. I confronted Dad. I waited. He admitted some things. My stomach tightened. "What things?" He said he owes money. That didn't surprise me. Not anymore. "How much?" "A lot." She looked exhausted. "He refinanced things after Mom died." I remained silent. "He made investments. Bad ones. And now he's desperate." The pieces continued falling into place. Not justification. Explanation. There is a difference. Greed often wears many disguises. Fear is one of the most common. Lily wiped her eyes. "He keeps saying this house would solve everything." I looked around the kitchen. The old cabinets. The photographs. The memories. People often imagine property as numbers on paper. They forget homes contain lives, stories, history, love. This house wasn't a financial solution. It was a family legacy. And Derek was trying to sell that legacy to escape mistakes he had made himself. Several days later, another discovery arrived. A forensic document examiner completed an initial review of the questioned signatures. The findings were careful, professional, measured, but the conclusion was unmistakable. The signatures showed strong indications of having been copied or recreated. I set the report down. The room suddenly felt very quiet. The lawsuit was no longer merely weak. It was becoming dangerous. For Derek. For anyone involved in creating those documents. For everyone. That evening, I walked outside and sat beneath Robert's oak tree. The sun was setting. Birds moved through the branches overhead. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I wasn't thinking about winning. I was thinking about consequences. Because somewhere along the way, my son-in-law had crossed a line. And once people cross certain lines, life rarely returns to what it was before. Meanwhile, another realization was beginning to form. The person most hurt by all of this wasn't me. It wasn't even Derek. It was Lily. A young woman forced to watch her family tear itself apart. And unless something changed soon, she might be the one who paid the highest price. By the time the final hearing arrived, the leaves on Robert's oak tree had begun to change color. Autumn had always been my favorite season. There was something honest about it. Trees didn't pretend they were still in summer. They let go of what was finished and prepared for what came next. I wish people could do the same. Instead, we often cling to mistakes long after they stop serving us. And Derek had spent nearly a year clinging to one very expensive mistake. The courthouse parking lot was already crowded when I arrived that morning. The sky was gray. A cool breeze moved through the trees. I sat in my car for a few moments before walking inside, not because I was nervous, because I was sad. No matter what happened that day, there would be no true winners. Families don't win lawsuits against each other. They survive them, or they don't. Inside the courtroom, Derek was already seated beside his attorney. He looked older than he had a year earlier. His shoulders slumped. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. Even the anger seemed diminished. What remained was exhaustion. For a brief moment I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the months of stress he had caused Lily. The sleepless nights, the tears, the uncertainty. Compassion did not erase accountability. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings began. Unlike earlier hearings, there was very little drama left. Most of the important questions had already been answered. The property records were clear. The ownership history was clear. The forensic review of the disputed documents was clear. Facts had done what facts always do. They had survived scrutiny. Derek's attorney made one final effort. He argued that misunderstandings and administrative errors had created confusion. The judge listened politely. Then he asked several questions. The answers were weak. By that point, everyone in the room knew it. The attorney knew it. Derek knew it. Even the spectators knew it. After nearly 2 hours, the judge removed his glasses and folded his hands. The courtroom became silent. He began reading his decision. Methodically. Carefully. The way good judges do. The ruling dismissed every ownership claim against my property. Everyone. The court found no legal basis for Derek's arguments. No ownership interest. No inheritance pathway. No valid claim. The house remained exactly what it had always been. Mine. Relief washed over me. Not excitement. Not triumph. Relief. Then the judge addressed something else. The documents. His tone became noticeably firmer. The court stopped short of making findings of intentional fraud. But the judge expressed serious concerns regarding the authenticity and handling of several submitted records. Additional referrals and reviews would follow. Those words landed heavily. Derek stared at the table. His attorney stared at the table. Nobody looked happy. When the hearing ended, people slowly filed out. I gathered my papers and placed them neatly into my folder. As I stood to leave, the judge looked toward me. Our eyes met briefly. There was no celebration, only mutual understanding. The law had done its job. Nothing more. Nothing less. Outside the courthouse, several friends approached me. Some had attended church with me for years. Others were former colleagues. Everyone offered congratulations. Then came the advice. Advice I had expected. You should go after him. Don't let him get away with this. Make him pay. One friend suggested civil penalties. Another suggested additional legal action. Technically, they weren't wrong. I had options. Several, in fact. The disputed documents alone could create significant problems for Derek. The thought crossed my mind. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. After all, he had tried to take my home. He had dragged our family through months of conflict. He had forced Lily into an impossible position. Part of me wanted consequences. Real consequences. Then I remembered something Robert used to say. Whenever conflicts arose, he always asked the same question. What outcome lets you sleep at night? Not what outcome wins. Not what outcome feels satisfying. What outcome allows you to live with yourself afterward? That question stayed with me. A few minutes later, I reached my car. Before I could unlock the door, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Derek stood several feet away. Alone. No attorney. No audience. No courtroom. Just us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. His eyes filled with tears. Real tears. Not courtroom tears. Not strategic tears. The kind that come when a person finally runs out of excuses. I'm sorry. The words came out barely above a whisper. I said nothing. He swallowed hard. I don't know how to fix this. Neither did I. But at least we were finally talking about the right problem. Not property. Not lawsuits. Damage. Family damage. The kind that doesn't disappear because a judge signs an order. I was angry, he said. I know. I blamed everyone. I know. His voice cracked. When Susan died, everything fell apart. There it was. The truth. Not greed. Not entirely. Fear. Loss. Grief. Shame. Debt. Failure. Those were the roots. The lawsuit had simply been the ugly fruit. I kept thinking if I could solve the money problems, everything else would get better. I nodded slowly. And did it? A bitter laugh escaped him. No. We stood quietly for a moment. The wind moved through nearby trees. Cars came and went. Life continued. Just as it always does. Finally, Derek looked at me. I hurt Lily. Yes. The answer was immediate. No softening. No excuses. No avoidance. He lowered his head. That seemed to hurt him more than losing the lawsuit. Good. Some lessons should hurt. Not because pain is the goal. Because growth often requires honesty. After a long silence, he asked a question. Why didn't you destroy me? I thought about that. The answer came easily. Because Susan wouldn't have wanted that. His eyes closed. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded, and for the first time in years I saw the man my daughter had married. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to give me hope. The lawsuit ended in October. The healing began in November. At least that's how I remember it. Court decisions happen on paper. Recovery happens in small moments. A phone call. A conversation. An apology. A choice to show up when it would be easier to stay away. For weeks after the final hearing, I heard very little from Derek. Part of me expected that. The man had lost a lawsuit, damaged relationships, and been forced to confront mistakes he had spent years avoiding. That kind of reckoning takes time. Meanwhile, I focused on ordinary life, church on Sundays, coffee with friends, volunteer work at the library, gardening whenever the weather allowed. Simple routines. The routines that remind us life continues even after difficult chapters end. One Saturday morning, I was trimming rose bushes near the porch when a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. I immediately recognized it. Derek's truck. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped out. He looked nervous, almost like a teenager arriving for a first job interview. I set down my gardening shears. "Morning." "Morning." Awkward silence followed. Eventually, he held up a cardboard bakery box. I brought pie. I couldn't help smiling. "What kind?" "Apple." "Smart choice." That finally earned a small laugh. The first genuine laugh I had heard from him in years. We sat on the porch together. The same porch where Robert and I had spent countless evenings watching sunsets. The same porch where Susan used to sit as a little girl swinging her legs from the railing. The pie remained unopened for nearly 30 minutes. Instead, we talked. Really talked. Not about lawsuits. Not about property. About life. About Susan. About mistakes. About grief. Eventually, Derek stared out across the yard. "I spent years being angry." "I know." "I thought everyone else had moved on." I listened quietly. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't. The honesty in his voice surprised me. Not because he was incapable of honesty. Because honesty had been absent for so long. "You loved her," I said. He nodded. "I still do." Neither of us spoke for a while. The wind rustled through Robert's oak tree. Sometimes silence says everything. Finally, Derek looked at me. "I think I stopped living after she died." That sentence explained more than a year of court filings ever could. Pain had become his identity. Loss had become his excuse, and eventually he had convinced himself that solving financial problems would somehow heal emotional wounds. But grief doesn't work that way. Money cannot replace people. Property cannot replace family. Winning cannot replace love. A few weeks later, Lily invited both of us to dinner. The invitation itself felt significant. For years, she had been trapped between us. Now she was trying to bring us back together. The dinner took place at her apartment. Nothing fancy. Pasta. Salad. Garlic bread. The kind of meal families share every day across America. Yet somehow it felt special. Maybe because everyone wanted to be there. At first, the conversation stayed cautious. Safe topics. Work. Sports. Weather. Then gradually the walls came down. Laughter returned. Stories returned. Even memories of Susan returned. Instead of causing pain, those memories began creating comfort. At one point, Lily disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a photo album. "Oh no," Derek groaned. She laughed. "Oh yes." The next hour became a journey through old photographs. School pictures. Birthday parties. Camping trips. Christmas mornings. There was Susan at age 10. Susan at 16. Susan on her wedding day. Susan holding newborn Lily. By the time we finished, all three of us had tears in our eyes. But they weren't sad tears. Not entirely. They were the kind of tears that remind us how lucky we were to have loved someone at all. Over the following months, Derek continued changing. Not overnight. Real change rarely happens overnight. Instead, it happened one decision at a time. He met with a financial counselor. Created a realistic budget. Sold several expensive items he couldn't afford. Accepted responsibility for debts he had tried to escape. Most importantly, he rebuilt trust with Lily. Trust returned slowly, brick by brick. Conversation by conversation, but eventually it returns. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after the lawsuit ended, Lily visited me. We sat beneath Robert's oak tree drinking iced tea. The branches were full of fresh green leaves. A new season. A new chapter. After a while, she asked a question. "Grandma?" "Yes." "Why didn't you ever tell people you were a federal judge?" I smiled. Over the years, many people had asked me that. The answer remained simple. Because it wasn't the most important thing about me. She frowned slightly. Most people would be proud of it. I am proud of it. Then why keep it quiet? I looked toward the house that had survived grief lawsuits and time itself. Then I looked back at my granddaughter. Titles are temporary. She listened carefully. One day every career ends, every office gets passed to someone else, every title eventually belongs to another person. She nodded. What stays? Character. The answer came immediately. Character stays. I reached over and squeezed her hand. The way you treat people, the promises you keep, the kindness you show when nobody is watching. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. You sound like Mom. That might have been the nicest compliment anyone ever gave me. As the sun began setting, I watched Derek pull into the driveway. He waved from his truck. Lily waved back. And suddenly I realized something. The greatest victory of my life hadn't happened in a courtroom. Not even close. The greatest victory was sitting beneath that oak tree watching a broken family slowly become whole again. The law protected my home. Forgiveness protected my family. And in the end, family was worth far more. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about someone you may need to forgive or someone who may need to hear from you today. Life is shorter than we realize, and pride is a poor substitute for love. And if you enjoy stories about family resilience and second chances, I'd be honored if you shared this story with someone who might need it and subscribed for more journeys like this one.